all the proposals failed. So we decided to build a prototype. We invited our leaders to a meeting. They came in, we showed them the app. They saw a lightweight app on the home screen, no browser. They clicked on it. It opened in an end-to-end experience. They searched for something. The page immediately opened up. They tapped on a detail page. It immediately opened up. They turned off Wi-Fi and it would still work because of all the things that were cached. It was only after we saw their eyes light up, we said that, hey, this is a mobile site developed with a new kind of a technology. And that's how we got funding.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. And today I'm actually sitting down with a product leader. My name is Nate Desmond, and I'm thrilled to be sitting down with Karan Peri. Karan is a product leader with experience across a whole lot of companies, including Nansen, Coinbase, Twitter, Amazon, Flipkart, and Microsoft. And he's known for pioneering progressive web apps, including Flipkart Lite. Karan, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Nate. Happy to be here.
To kick off, you've had a very impressive journey across a lot of different major companies. What was the pivotal moment that led you to transition from engineering into product early in your career?
Yeah, I think it was quite a natural evolution. I think I started falling into product quite naturally based on the things that excited me. So I always liked technology. I used to spend a lot of time in computer labs in my school. I think my parents sort of saw that and then got me a computer. But the day I had that, it was an old, I'm probably dating myself, it was an old 286 computer where you had to do most of the stuff by command line. So when I had that, I started coding at the age of 8 or 9 at that point. So I was hooked at that point. I knew my life would be technology and nothing else. But then as I did that, I was surrounded by business. I used to enjoy business. I used to enjoy figuring out how people make money, how do they sell to others, how do they convince to sell to others. I used to read nonfiction books a long time before people usually get to. Even at school, I was reading those. So I think business was always part of my life. Plus, I was surrounded by business as well as part of my family. So that was part of my life. And my mother is an artist, so design was also a part of my life. So I think this is all in hindsight, but I think technology, business, and design were the trifectas, right? Which was always around me. So when I became an engineer, I became a technologist. I went very deep. I worked in healthcare and banking systems. I worked in very deeply technical areas where I had to make COBOL mainframe systems talk to Ruby and Java, and then bring them in the 21st century as a young engineer, less than 1 year out of college. So I did all of that. That made me very deeply technical. But then after a few years did my MBA, I came back. It was 2008. There were no jobs anywhere. The job offers I had after my MBA got rescinded, so I had to come back to India. I was in Spain at that time. At that time, then I founded a company. In those 1 or 2 years, I did go around offering my services for free. I worked for certain people, different kinds of fields. I even consulted for restaurants and furniture stores. So I did all of that. Then I started my own company around education. It was on adult education. So that was my first tryst with actually making a product. That didn't work out so well. I ran out of money. I didn't know at that time how expensive content creation was. So then I took what I had, went to an education company who then used my skills for K-12 education. I think that is the time when I had to build a team, hire designers, engineers, build a product. I was responsible for mobile at that time, this back in 2010, 2011, and cloud. This was all new.
Yes.
So I had to build those teams, and that is when people started calling me a product person, a product manager. So I had to Google what is a product manager. Why are they calling me that? Right? Didn't even know what that is. Spent some time there. Then the company got sold. All of us exited, and then Microsoft came calling. So that is with Microsoft. It was my first official role as product manager, and they were called program managers. I think they still are in Microsoft. So that's how I got into it. And from there on, there was no looking back. I was hooked. Product was something that just brought design, business, technology, my need to build stuff, all of it together, and then actually sell it to people, get revenue, grow. That's all that I always like to do. So that's how I got into it.
I love how organically that all came together. Do you feel like starting from that highly technical standpoint gave you a advantage versus someone who comes in from more of a business side of product?
Percent. I wouldn't doubt that. I know people like to say, "Hey, you don't need to have a degree, and you don't need to, be an engineer." I agree with that, but I think at some point, if you're building technical products, you should get technical. I think it gave me a huge advantage. I could sit with engineers like an engineer. I could talk to them. I could connect all the worlds together. I understood what they were saying. I understood how long something might take. I understood the limitations of technology, which is a very nuanced point, and that has helped me even today. This has helped me in each and every role, because for some reason I find myself in very deeply technical areas, right? In 0 to 1 situations, even in large companies. I don't know why. I At some point I didn't actively seek them out, but just found myself there. When you're there, in those situations, like understanding the limitations of technology, what it can do, what it cannot, allows you to push those limitations as well. Once you know the boundaries are, then you can push them. And whenever you push the boundaries of technology, new possibilities open up to solve problems that you couldn't solve before. This isn't just true with the AI era right now, right? It's always been true. If you understand the limits of tech, then you can work backwards and you can see all the things that you can do with it. Certain light bulbs start going off in your head, and that's one source of new product ideas as well. So I think I was just super comfortable because I was very technical.
Love that. It reminds me of this book I was reading. I think it's by Cal Newport. And he talked about the concept of the possible edge, where if you look at science, it's not unusual for someone to make a discovery and someone else to make the exact same discovery at the same time. And the reason isn't that they're plagiarizing each other. The reason is that that is the edge of where science is today. And thus, that is where the discoveries are going to be made. And so it's interesting what you say that, like, recognizing where is that possible edge and where has it maybe moved in the last 2 years to uncover new opportunities that no one else has realized are actually possible yet.
So, and this is something that I tell people, that usually when you look at Twitter and when you look at posts, it's folks say that start problem first, and that's always great advice. Don't start tech first, start problem first. But there are these ideas at the edges that show up only when you understand tech first. So you understand tech, you're always out there constantly seeking. When you understand the technology, certainly there are certain issues in your life which you have seen or within your customers' journeys that make sense to be solved using that technology. It didn't occur to you before because you never thought it could be done, right? But now you can start tech first as well. So there's some ways, some interesting ways to find those things that you want to work with.
One fascinating example of that from your history is you're at Flipkart, which for anyone who's not aware, I know you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say it's almost like the Amazon of India.
Yes.
You were there and you pioneered the Flipkart Lite with a progressive web app. First of all, can you explain what is a progressive web app? And then how did you do that 0 to 1 journey?
Sure. So put it very simply, progressive web app is a collection of set of technologies by which you can get native app like functionality in a normal mobile website. So I think that's there are some technical innovations behind those that have made that possible. It's all started with Google Chrome's research team first, but that's what a progressive web app is. So imagine not having to install an app and having the same experience on your mobile site. So that's what a PWA does for you. Yeah, I was the you can call myself a co-creator or a co-founder along with some of the most brilliant engineers and engineering leaders I have ever worked with in my life.
What was that 0 to 1 experience like? How did you discover this is a new idea, this is possible, and then how did you go about actually building it?
Yeah, I think that was what Flipkart was one of my most intense experiences in my life. And I joined Flipkart at a time when India had gone mobile. So they had skipped the desktop phase completely. They went straight to mobile, but they were on low powered devices. E-commerce was blowing up, and it was growing. It was mostly a metro tier one city phenomena, and the tier two and tier twos, the three cities were trying to figure out what it means, and companies were trying to serve them. So that was the context in which I joined Flipkart, and I first joined as a product manager for mobile web. So Flipkart.com on browsers, right? So on mobile browsers. So mobile web was that. I didn't own the entire web team at that point, right? I eventually got around to owning that, and thanks to a lot of successes. Uh, that was that was the time that I launched. Had a traditional mobile site. Was It was built on how the traditional desktop site, the original desktop site was built. It had very low conversion rates. So in e-commerce, conversion is a big deal. It's the number of people who walk in and actually end up buying. So that's a very big deal. It's a direct input and lever into GMV, gross merchandise value, or essentially revenue, right? And
Yeah.
so at that time, our core focus was conversion rate optimization. And conversion rate optimization is a very vast field. It has a lot of nuances. You can be a really great CRO expert. And we spent the time building our team mentality and mindset and structures and processes around it. We were world class at it. We used to run experiments like the wind. We did things that even now people have to be taught to be better, to think like that. For example, looking into acquisition channels, trying to understand the level of intent, and trying to figure out the customized experiences they land in and which channel converts better, which page converts better, funnel analysis, drop offs, experience design internally, every single thing that we could think of. Our roadmap used to be full of experiments. Right. And many of those experiments would win. Thankfully, at Flipkart scale, we could run A B tests, which are very difficult to run in startups, but we could run A/B tests. So having that A/B test infrastructure in place and doing all of that. So we did, I would say, everything right. And yet, the wins that we would get would be minuscule. The needle hardly moved. Sometimes they would also go away. On a good day, our conversion rate would be a zero point 0.8 or a 0.9%. So it was quite. So at that time, for a while, we thought we were successful because when we asked around to other people that, hey, you're a horizontal player as well across the world. What are your conversion rates? There were minor differences based on what people majored in. But everybody sort of claimed that, hey, our mobile sites are just out there for our branding. We don't really convert that much on mobile side. It's mostly desktop and app, etc. So we thought we were successful at that time that, hey, all right, there is a ceiling. Nobody is doing any better. So it looks like we are
Yeah.
ceiling. And at that time, there was an app only movement which says that if the entire company wakes up tomorrow and works only on the app, which converts 300, 400% better, right? Then
Yeah.
than a mobile site, then wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't we be leaders tomorrow, right? And there was an app only movement where web was deprioritized, and we were working on literally shutting it down. Strangely and ironically enough, I was given the responsibility to shut it down as well. So I had to kill my own product that I was hired for. But while we were doing that, we also started a parallel track because there were some of us who didn't believe that this was the end of web, and we believed that there were we need to understand the actual reasons why mobile site doesn't convert instead of just accepting that this is how it is. So we started questioning. We conducted a lot of customer interviews. We watched them closely. We tried to figure out where they stall, where they're not, and try to understand all those problems, right? And we decided to go back to first principles and try and figure that out. And there were a lot of reasons that came up. There was the way we were measuring data, the kind of people who visit mobile sites, right? And how we are actually self-selecting, the experience within it, the havoc that flakiness of the mobile network plays on it. So there were a lot of basic stuff that came out. I wrote a blog on this at that time as well. I think after we got a little success on all the things that we learned from it. But so there were all these experiences. However, with the current technology, we could not attack them directly. Like flakiness of the network, we couldn't do much about. Right, the experience, the smoothness of the experience, etc. There was a limitation to what you could do. If you would make a single page app and you push the limits of front end tech a lot, then the performance started breaking down. So it was beautiful, but it would not.
Yeah.
There were a lot of issues. So we started reaching the limits of what we thought were limits of physics of the wire at that time. You remember I mentioned some of the best engineers I worked with. So I remember one of them coming one day and saying that, hey, have you heard of our new technology called service workers? So this is the tech first part of it.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah, service workers was a new tech which Google Chrome team was working on. And I think it was only available in Chrome version 41, 42 at that time. That was it was ancient time at that point, but it was still cutting edge. Then as we and the thought there wasn't that we would build a new mobile site and build a new web app, etc. It was just that hey, there is a new web tech called service workers because we were a web team and there was a group of engineers who were always contributing to open source and they were connected to people around and they would always discuss new tech. So they came to me and they said that, have you heard of service workers? And then we started discussing service workers. And then we realized that, whoa, it allows you to program the network layer, which means that we can have a great experience without firing a server call, which means the pages don't have to wait. So we can respond straight away from the client itself. Oh, okay, that's what apps do. Okay. We can cache and we can load a skeleton. Oh, wait, that's what apps do. Right? So as we started digging into this more, suddenly it became very apparent. I don't quite remember when the light bulb went off, but I think all of us got the same idea at the same time in the same meeting that we could re-architect the whole thing and burn the current mobile site down and create something new. So that was the genesis of the idea itself. But our problems had probably just started at that point because you remember we were in an app only mode. So now
Yeah.
we had to convince everybody and our leadership that this is something that's important. I must have written five or six big, huge documents, proposals. None of them worked. It's very hard to explain things that have never been done before in a written word. Uh, in,
Yeah.
in some places, it works. Like in Amazon, for example, the written word is taken more seriously just because they had this culture of writing that first. But in this point, we were swimming against a massive app only wave. The conversions were low. We had no credibility at that point, right? 50 bips win or 100 bips win, moving conversions from point 8 to point 9 doesn't win you too many brownie points. So at that time, all the proposals failed. So we decided to build a prototype, right? And that was something that I remember had worked for me in Microsoft as well because this is the same problem. Brand new tech, we had to convince people none of the written word works. We built a prototype. We invited our leaders to a meeting and they came in. We showed them the app. They saw a lightweight app on the home screen, no browser. They clicked on it. It opened in an end-to-end experience. They searched for something. The page immediately opened up. They tapped on a detail page. It immediately opened up. They turned off Wi-Fi and it would still work because of all the things that were cached. The pathways that were cached would still work. So it was only after we saw their eyes light up, we said that, hey, this is a mobile site. It's a mobile web app developed with a new kind of a technology. It's only available on certain browser, but we think it's going to be the future because nobody can deny it once you see it. And that's how we got funding. So that was again just the beginning of our journey. You remember we haven't really started building the real product yet. And that was the
Yeah.
beginning of the journey. So I'll pause here because you could probably go on for 2 more hours on this. That's that's
It's
that's what
incredible.
the journey was to actually getting there, and then we took it to 0 to 1. That worked. We launched in Google Chrome Web Summit, and then we also had a 1 to 1,000 journey to actually scale it very fast. We literally blitz scaled that across browsers. I traveled to China to work with UC Web, which was owned by Alibaba at the time, to work
Wow.
with them to make their browser run Flipkart. So yeah, Flipkart Lite. So there was a lot of growth efforts that happened. Worked really busily with my performance marketing teams as well to make all the channels open up. There were a lot of SEO troubles because of the technology changing. The crawlers couldn't read the stuff. So there were a lot of challenges, but that's how we got to where we were. And then the team got funding and we grew. The app only was behind us. Then we took all the learnings to desktop as well and then redefined that too later. That's how I came to own the web experience. And
And that is absolutely amazing. When you were in those early stages, I imagine it's very disappointing to be making minor gains, see that there seems to be this headroom across the industry that you just cannot get the conversion rate any better. And then they tell you to shut down your product. How did you push through all of that headwind and say, okay, actually, it's worth building a prototype, which I imagine still is like 2 to 3 weeks of work at least for your team?
We had a very crack team. Again, some of the best engineers I've worked with, and we used to move very fast in Flipkart. I think this is something that is very nuanced about 0 to 1 products. When you start from scratch, is that you need people who have a lot of grit, right, and a lot of resilience.
Fair.
You cannot get disappointed because 0 to 1 means going through a lot of walls, right? Especially when you have to convince others that this is good to do. The reality of the situation is, if something is a founder's idea, the level of convincing required is massively less. So that is, if something is naturally discovered through discovery methods, right, within the company, and say, hey, this is a good place to invest in, let's go and invest in, that's relatively easier. But when you're going against the tide and everybody wants to shut things down at that point, and rightly so, if you look at their logic
Yeah.
at that point you have to have a lot of resilience, and that has served me very well over my entire career. And thankfully I had partners in engineering and design who had great skill, and they had awesome resilience, right, and they would get back up the moment they were shut down. So we were, at some point, we were actually doing both things. We were doing the sanctioned project of shutting things down, and the unsanctioned project of staying over after everybody had left to actually build this product. And this was also, if I remember correctly, this was also happening during a big sale in India, which Flipkart again pioneered, called the Big Billion Sale. The Big Billion Sale, which is similar to the Singles Day in China, which Alibaba had pioneered. And it was the largest sale ever. And this was happening while that was going on, and it was Diwali and festival time. So thankfully, people were busy and they didn't see these 3, 4 people cracking away at a prototype somewhere in a room. It didn't take the team a very long time, just because they were so deep in the technology and they were so good at what they did. I think we all built it in a week and a half probably. So it was, we moved really fast on it because we knew, again, momentum matters. At that time, we knew this instinctively, that time kills everything. So if we had waited for a long time, the whole business after the festival season. So that's what we were doing. But you just have to have resilience and believe, like, truly believe that something is going to be transformational. If you find it, you have to go at it. There is a point you have to give up as well if some conditions reach, but we weren't there yet. We had to see the product for ourselves, and we had to show it to everybody, and then we had to be told that no, this is wrong and why. Right? Until that happened, we just kept going. Right? So I think that's probably as simple as that.
How do you people hire people like you? So let's say there's a founder listening or even a big company that says, we need someone who can do 0 to 1. We need this crack engineering team. How do you find these people?
So it is super hard to do that, right? And I've been talking to some of my colleagues, and whenever we speak, we keep asking ourselves, how did Flipkart manage to get all these people? Why were we surrounded by brilliant people all the way, right? And then we look back into how we interviewed as well when we became interviewers there, and others. And some of the things that I can look back up now, and they have become principles and tenets for me. So I look for evidence of clear ownership, evidence of pushing boundaries, evidence of moving fast, evidence of raw intelligence. So you need evidence for that. Even if it's a student, what did you do while you were in engineering? When you had to build projects, did you do more? Did you build it yourself? First of all, like, many don't, you would be surprised to hear, but did you build it yourself? You built it yourself. What did you learn? What else did you do outside of just trying to get through the 4 years? If it's an experienced person, where did you come from? What kind of a company were you in? What kind of a team were you in? How much did you actually contribute to the growth of the product? Right, were you just along for the ride, or did you contribute? So just asking questions and going deeper and deeper helps you understand that if a person has truly contributed, they would have an answer because it's part of their scar tissue, and you can just figure that out. So I think if I have to reduce that into a single sentence, I would say that I usually try and hire people who have come from environments where you have to either grow or you die.
Fair.
If you don't grow, you shouldn't be able to survive. So That's the environment in Microsoft, and was part of 0 to 1. Again, became part of that grow or die problem, right? If that product didn't succeed, it would have died, and I would have probably died in the company along with it. So it was because I put my everything into it at that point. So yeah, I think that's always a good criteria to look at and hire.
That's a really interesting place as well. When you're at Microsoft, at a time when Microsoft was not a fast moving company, Flipkart, in one degree, was moving quickly as a company, even though you were trying to move in the opposite direction. But Microsoft just wasn't moving fast at all. How did you do a 0 to 1 project in Microsoft at that time?
This was I just keep thinking about it. It was so relevant now as well, and very surprisingly, I've come full circle, right? And I'll tell you how it was from a technical perspective. But when I was in Microsoft, I was in the Bing apps team. So I was in the Bing team that time. And Bing, I don't know if you remember or if you've ever come across, but at some point they had Bing apps, right? They had the sports app, the weather app, news app, finance app. They had all these apps. And content was very crucial for Bing. I was in Bing Sports to start with, and content was very crucial there. So sports news was a big draw for people to come into and use the app, right? You don't have games all the time, the ones that you want.
True.
So you wouldn't come for fixtures and matchups all the time, but content was something that would draw you in. At that time, we had about, I think, around 100, maybe more editors spread across all over the world who would review, read, and curate sports articles coming in from SB Nation, Deadspin, and AP News, etc. All the wires, right? So they would read, they would curate, then they would manually go and mark that this is the sports team, or this is the sports person, or this is the championship that this article belongs to, and then it would go manually go and reside in those areas, which would then show up through the app. So I'm oversimplifying it, but that's how that was the structure was. So the curation aspect of it, etc., was super expensive and, of course, super slow. At that time, the belief was that it should be slow because that's how you get quality, and we did. And I did a lot of work there. Launched NBA experiences, NFL experiences. It was the time for Sochi Winter Olympics, so Winter Olympics experience, etc. But during this time, I came across two people in Microsoft Research in Redmond researching something called named entity recognition. And this was my first experience with machine learning and AI.
Wow.
Back in 2013, when it wasn't cool, people didn't even know what it is. Even recommendations based on machine learning wasn't obvious.
Yeah.
So it was way back then, and they showed it to me again. Super a set of superhuman engineers and product people. There was one product person, one research scientist, and that's how they were. They told me that this was named entity recognition, and I asked them what it does. And they said, "Well, you read a text, and it'll extract proper nouns from it." And the moment I heard that, it was obvious that I could give it 100 articles, and it would find the sports team and the sports names immediately.
Wow.
So this was again an example of tech first opening up the possibility of what can happen. Until then, I was not even trying to solve this problem. I didn't even know it was a problem. No one knew that content could that is an issue, right?
Yeah.
And then basically worked with them. At that time, training was super hard. I think I personally would have read 200 to 300 articles for creating training data and training sets. I had no idea how NFL works, so I had to learn that as well. And hand flagged and hand tagged the articles, fed it back to the system, created 3 sets, training, evaluation, etc. So did all of that. Thankfully, I come full circle now, as I said, because now we're working on AI and built several AI products and launched. But that was my first stint with machine learning. So and then this is the same process of trying to convince people, them not understanding that this is feasible because nobody believed that this kind of stuff would work. Now this is something that we can do probably in 30 minutes or maybe even lesser, right? But at that time this wasn't just the case. So I went through the same 0 to 1 challenge, wrote a lot of documents, proposals in Microsoft style, didn't work at all. Nobody would agree, nobody would understand. Then worked with the research team again. We built a prototype, enrolled an engineer who was equally on my floor, who was equally interested in technology. Requested him to build it for us because at the time we needed engineering talent to connect those APIs and to actually uh, create a prototype that works. It wasn't as easy to build as it is right now, right? You actually needed an engineer to work with you. I would hand tag articles. I would look into what needs to build. Person would do it. Would spend time after hours, build the prototype, and that is when it got prioritized. Once people saw that, wow, 10 articles, and within a second, it just automatically classified and categorized in according to team name and sport name, etc.
Yeah.
I think that was my journey in brief, and then there was this whole experience of actually launching it and then scaling it. Then I believe it was I left by then, but I think at that time, but then they expanded it to MSN network, MSN content as well on the MSN side, etc., which was far bigger. So yeah, that was my experience at that time. It required a lot of grit, required a lot of resilience, working after hours, doing things that are unsanctioned, unprioritized, unfunded, trying to convince and sell to engineers that, hey, can you help me? Trying to make the researchers believe that I will find a commercial use case for it. Why don't you help me out? Right. And that was the experience. So when I brought this experience to Flipkart, I think that might have helped in the interviews a bit.
Yes. Yes. And it's interesting the parallels there of being willing to do things that are not directly rewarded or maybe even are unsanctioned initially, and being willing to identify what are these interesting new technologies that might go absolutely nowhere. But every so often you discover machine learning now can do this thing, or you discover service workers now enable progressive web apps. I'd love to pivot from there in a slightly different direction. So, a lot of the people listening to the show are marketers, and we would love to understand how to work more effectively with product people like yourself. So, I'm curious to hear who are maybe some of the best marketers you've worked with, and what did they do that made them effective partners?
Yeah, I think so. I was again fortunate enough to work across the entire life cycle of a product. I really do believe because we've seen so many different products and companies of different sizes and different industries or different technologies succeed and fail. That you understand that the product is not the actual software product itself, right? The product starts way before the product and it ends way after the product.
True.
For a customer, the entire experience is the product. So if you have a bad marketing experience or if you have a bad customer service experience, you would say this company is somebody I wouldn't work with. They wouldn't say that, hey, I won't talk to your customer service executive, but I would use your product, right? And they don't discern like that. So the product is
True.
everything, which means that as a product person responsible for the success of a product, you have to be everywhere, not at the same time, that never works, but when the time is right. The best marketing people who I've worked with, I started working with great marketing people in Flipkart. At Flipkart, they had a very, very deep and cool marketing team. There was brand marketing, which was, of course, slightly separated, right? It wasn't really plugged in too much into the product because it was marketing, branding, and marketing, Flipkart selection, etc. But then we would work really closely with performance marketing teams. So teams that run affiliates and paid ads, etc. And SEO was also part of that team essentially. And as somebody responsible for web, this was super important. Right? And I think the working well with product team and product team working with the marketing team, it comes down to very simple things, right? The simplest thing that I can think of that made things work really well is to just be proactive and approach. So marketing teams generally think that they will not be received well, and they think that it's probably too early in the product's life cycle to go and interrupt a team. But
Yeah.
right, I never saw it like that, right? So when somebody in Flipkart, remember, they would move very fast, ambitious, push boundaries. So when performance marketing team came and basically said that, hey, listen, you're the web team and even the app team, etc. At that point, right? Traffic matters a lot, right? And we are responsible for generating traffic. These are some of the things that we need to generate traffic, right? And so that you have the right landing experience, etc. Can you help us? So I could have at that point said that, listen, we're building the product right now. Come back later. Let's have a meeting 2 weeks from now, etc. But when you have an intuitive understanding that the kind of people who come in, the type of customers who walk in into your product, and the kind of intent that they have in their mind actually matters in your conversion rate. then you understand, then you take this as a boon, right? You're thankful that this person walked up, right? And then you started working. So I would say, please walk up, right? And speak to your product counterpart, right? On the product side of things, if marketing team comes to you, then be receptive. In fact, be proactive and seek out the marketing team. I think after Flipkart, I always sought out the marketing team. Said, we're building a new product. Would you like to review the PRD? And I would always see surprise and shock on their faces. And I was like, I want to know what your landing experiences can be. If this is successful, then we would want to put gasoline on fire, and that's you. How would you do that? What hooks can we keep in place so that we can move faster then, and we don't have to start our 0 to 1 thinking at that point? What can we do? I think these conversations are very important to have. So when you're writing a PRD, and when you're writing a plan, and you're thinking about things, bring people in early on in the process. It doesn't mean that every day you need to have a marketing meeting, but if they know what you're building, then they can go back and then create a plan. And if they are part of the updates, then they know things have changed, right? These simple things, they don't slow you down.
Yeah.
If you do it smartly, they actually don't. They actually move you pretty fast. It'll magnify your impact later, right? It's a multiplier, right? So I think that's what I would say. Also, the best marketing teams came heavily armed with data, right? Because the best product people will ask a lot of questions. Right? They would say, why should I focus on this right now? What is the conversion from this channel? Right? What is how many paid ads do we work? What is the ROI from there? What if we shift it here? What kind of landing pages work? What kind of landing pages don't work? Where do you see the maximum drop off? What are the top keywords we should work for? They would ask questions, right? And the best teams actually have answers to them. So they are plugged in into the analytics team or themselves. They have data. They're very scientific and clinical in their approach, right? Especially performance marketing. Obviously, you can't be that scientific and clinical in brand marketing. That's different. I've never been very close. We had probably few times a year connection with brand marketing teams, right? Especially when you're launching something big, etc. But performance marketing teams, we work very closely, and that's very clinical. It's very akin to a product growth team, right? Very experimental, very data oriented. The teams who weren't like that, who didn't have these tools at their disposal or use them, I didn't find them to be that effective and impactful either. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if that makes sense with all your marketing experience and what you have seen, but that's what I have seen work really well.
Is one way, especially that second piece, is one way I've often thought about it when I'm working with the new product team. Having a strength in data and understanding what is working, what is not working, and also a strength in research, understanding the why, not just what is happening, but why is it happening through talking to people and saying, like, hey, we see there's a drop off of X%. And when we talk to people, these are the 5 most common reasons. That almost buys you the right to have a seat at the table in making decisions about the product and thinking about how should we be developing this?
Yeah, absolutely. The first level is buys you the right, and we are all in sales. We are all selling our services and our impact to everyone else, right? So once you bought the right, you're actually more right than wrong if you have that data. So nothing is useful if you don't eventually win. Moving fast means nothing if you don't eventually start winning, right? Having data means nothing if you don't eventually win, right? Nobody gives you points for involving marketing teams early, right? That's just an input. It increases the chances of success, right? Everything in product is about increasing chances of success. Great, the best product people see it as probabilities. And I have just seen that involving marketing and also within product teams, engineering, design as early as possible, involved in figuring out the problems, understanding the why, etc., actually helps you move faster and actually helps you learn more and adapt and pivot more, and you just eventually start winning more often than not.
And that's really an interesting area that came up in my research for this conversation. You've talked about the importance of owning the outputs rather than the inputs. How does that come up in your prioritization? Because it is a really, just to add briefly, it's a really interesting thing that you mentioned, like talk early to your marketers, but there are infinite things that you could be doing and you cannot do all of them. So, how do you prioritize based on this output focus?
On a day-to-day basis, outputs is what the team is actually focused on, right? So it's the work that you do, and I'll try and explain, right? It's you should be focused on the outcome. That is the punchline. That is what you should keep in mind, that no matter what outputs you work on, if this doesn't lead to an outcome, it doesn't matter, right? But to lead to that outcome, you have to work on something, and that something is the output. So let me give you an example of just to sort of understand the difference between outcomes and outputs in general, right? And that is important. Like, actually answers your direct question as well. That how do you actually build that environment where you focus on those things? You start by actually helping people understand as a leader, right? Helping people understand what is the difference between outcomes and outputs, right? That outputs is actually not a bad thing in itself, right? It just becomes undesirable when that becomes a goal.
Yeah.
When output becomes the goal, that's when it becomes undesirable. So, as an example, just to put this in context, the difference between outcome and outputs. At the highest level, a company has an overarching goal, right? Let's say it's revenue growth. Now, but here's the thing about overarching goals, you and revenue, right? You can't really control revenue directly. You can't go and deposit money in the bank and say that, hey, I've added to the revenue, right? You have to, yeah, instead you have to influence it through specific levers, right? And when you do that, these are the inputs into revenue. For example, in a video streaming business, the inputs might mean hours watched or new content added, whereas the overarching goal is subscription revenue. But how do you get that? You have increased the number of hours watched and new content added. Now, each team is responsible for pulling certain levers. For them, these levers, the inputs into revenue, become their outcomes. For them, the outcome is the input into revenue, because that's the team responsible for, say, increasing the number of hours watched. Now, if you drill down to that team, the outcome, they have an outcome which is hours watched. To achieve these outcomes, the team needs to take certain actions. The actions can be building new features, removing features, improving processes, removing customer friction points, etc. Now, these are what we would call outputs. So when you build a feature, when you run an experiment, when you improve a process as an output. The challenge arises when teams start identifying with their outputs instead of understanding that it's a means to an end, their outcomes.
Yeah.
This misalignment leads to wasted effort and things that don't move. So you don't count the number of experiments that you're doing. Right? So you don't say that, hey, let's celebrate today, or please promote me, and write that in your perf review, self-assessment, that I ran 4 experiments. Right? That is the problem. But you still have to run the 4 experiments. So you have to be focused on the output, but only to get to the outcome. So
Yeah.
that is the difference here, right? And as a leader, you have to build the machine that builds the machine, right? So I think who said this? Probably, I don't know. I think Elon Musk said this. Is stuck in my head. The build the machine that builds the machine. So that's what I do right now. I build an environment where great products get built. Right. That's my role now. So how do you create an org that wins more often than not? You create it by making sure they understand what the true outcomes are, right? Super clarity, and it all starts from leaders. Clarity starts from the top. Ownership starts from the top. If leader founders, right from the CEO, founders, and the local leaders, if they don't believe that you have to be outcome focused, then nothing would work. You can be an individual PM sitting there, you would always be running through walls, because someone or the others would say that, hey, but this is not what we are judged on, right? And
Yeah.
so why are we focusing on that? So it has to start from top. When we do that, you have to ensure that the product leaders, engineering leaders understand that really well. And half of the job of a product leader is repetition, right? Repetition, the clarity demands repetition. You can't say it once, write it once. You have to repeat it, right? So you have to find people who can own this, and you have to be the kind of leader who can make sure that these people understand what the difference between outcome and outcome. Then there are some interventions that you have to do. Like, such culture has to be manufactured. It doesn't happen automatically. That is why it's hard. Otherwise, it would have been super easy. So you have,
Yeah.
at what point would outcome and outputs be discussed? Well, that's the roadmap planning, the planning cycles. So whenever you're planning, whether you're doing a quarterly plan or a half yearly plan or an yearly plan. I hope you're not doing yearly plans. No matter when you're doing yearly, what kind of planning you're doing, to make sure that the outcomes are super clear, that these are the outcomes that we're working on, and the outputs are in the roadmap, right? And as a leader, you have to be fine. This is a nuance. You have to be fine if the roadmap changes mid-quarter. It's okay, because that's what being outcome focused means. This means the team has found a better way to achieve the outcome. than the way they thought they froze during planning. It doesn't matter anymore. If there is a better way, so be it. If you have reached a point where you can still turn back and then swap out something, that's fine. Many leaders are not comfortable with this. They would say, "Hey, but that's not what we discussed. That's not what we planned. Why are you removing this? Let's do it next quarter." But true outcome focus means it should be fine, right? As long as the outcome is achieved, right? And following that accountability, right? It has to be insane driving of accountability. So when I say that, it means that you are talking to people in terms of outcomes, right? When someone comes and says that, "Hey, Karan, we've run 5 experiments. Look how cool." I would say that, "Hey, that's great because you're having more shots at the goal. But what was the impact, right? What outcome did you get?" And if they come back and say that, but the outcome can be experienced only after 4 weeks, I would say that's fine, but I'm not going to celebrate the number of experiments. I will celebrate the number of experiments once we get to either the learnings or the outcomes or the needle has moved, right? So either of those things, because you have to make space for people to actually think and work. If you're outcome focused, your roadmap can't be choco blocked with every minute accounted for. You have to
Yeah.
find if it changes, but you also have to be fine to make sure that things that don't need to be done right away are not there. Does this framework upgrade, right, to a different version? Is that necessary right now? Do you need to refactor something right now, or can it be done later? Is it already too late to refactor that we are spending 90% of the time trying to figure out spaghetti code? If not, then let's not predict that this is a problem yet. Let's do that a little while later, right? What so making space for people to actually do things is super important. I think just repetition. If the leader is focused on the outcome and keeps repeating it and keeps questioning and asking and is interested in it genuinely, right? And preferably is in the details as well. Like I'm usually in a lot of details. I understand every roadmap item. Like at least take the time to understand that. I review things. I give a lot of feedback to teams. So if you're that kind of leader, then the culture gets created by itself. But you have to also have interventions. Like planning, you have to make sure the structure of the planning is such that outcomes and outputs are discussed as outcomes and outputs. They're not a side conversation. They are the main hero, right? And you talk about it. So I think if you just do these things consistently, not just one quarter, consistently, right, then the culture would get formed and people will understand that I'm looking for impact. That's what I have to work for, and however I achieve it.
When you think about someone from outside the team, you mentioned this like need to be flexible, change the roadmap as long as it has the correct response, it gets the job done. We need to be flexible. If there are people from outside the team, whether it's people hire in like the VPs and the C suite or people in other orgs like marketing or partnerships, they come to you and say like, "Hey, we really need this feature." What are the ways that they do that well, and what are the ways that they do that badly?
Yeah, so that'll always happen. I don't think I've ever had a roadmap where this wasn't true, right? So we like to call them strategic projects so that no one questions them. But that might not be a bad idea actually. You have a section in the roadmap allocate, say, strategic project, right? So this can't change. But yeah, in all seriousness, allocate capacity for these P0s must haves. And then the trick is in the team understanding the why behind it. Sometimes it takes a lot of time. Sometimes
Yeah.
it takes a lot of time, and sometimes the founders have to do it themselves. I remember very recently when there was a 0 to 1 project within. So the founder had to repeat. He was the founder, right? He could have driven things saying that, "Hey, because I said so," but he had to repeat the need for the 0 to 1 product over and over again over multiple months, even when people were working on it to improve confidence in it. Right. So that's what it takes. And that is what I needed to do when I had to drive a strategic project in Prime Video, which had never been done before. Again, there was a culture creation that was required before the project got executed. You have to repeat. You have to make people understand. You might have to have a lot of sidebar conversations, a lot of town hall conversations. But if people understand the why behind it, then they get it. And if they're not understanding the why behind it, maybe there is some feedback there that maybe it's not the right thing to do as well. So you there is upward movement too, where you can rethink based on new information. But if something is truly necessary, then helping people understand why it's a must have, why it's a minimum requirement that we have to do this is important.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
that's interesting as well because it reminds me of because you sort of get in both directions. There's the why when it has a good why and you need to make sure people understand that why. And then there's the why when maybe it actually doesn't have a good why and you need to understand the problem behind the problem. I find this so fascinating when I'm doing user research, especially. You ask someone like, oh, what do you want to see changed in the product? They have 15 different things they want to see changed. But when you ask them, why do you want that change? You realize like they're asking us to mail them a piece of paper, but actually what they really would want is just to get it instantly, but they don't know that email exists. And so we can solve their problem better by sending them an email rather than building this whole mail system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like in Flipkart, the app only thing was an example of that, wasn't it? So there was information, regular data we had to flow back. We made several cases of why, app only might not work, why we need the web, why we need actually both. We need to be where the customers are. Then we ran experiments. We shut down parts of certain areas and then ran experiments on whether it was beneficial or we had hold out. We did a lot of things there, right? And it requires energy and it requires a lot of grit and persistence, which is why I said make sure that anybody running sufficiently complex and critical product team, right, especially 0 to 1 products, has that level of grit, because their grit would be needed. Things will happen whenever you're pushing boundaries, building something from nothing. It will you will come across something or the other. So it's super important for you to actually keep going.
Being able to run into a brick wall and get up and do it again.
One interesting example that comes up when you say when people ask for things. So I have been in the customer focused or client teams a lot, right? And own the end product. So you have, when you're in a large company like say Amazon, right? You have a lot of people asking you for things, right? And one thing that really helped filter out the real requests was that I would just ask them to do some work. So when people
Hard.
said, "Hey, can you just build this?" I would say, "Great. Can you write me a one pager on why it needs to be built?" Right? Or can you basically create a PR FAQ? PR FAQ is a very Amazon thing. You have certain FAQs, you write a press release, etc. I said you don't. It doesn't need to be a 6 pager. You can write a 2 pager, write something. And I think about 60 to 70% of those requests would go away right there. So that tells you that how much that person would be in the trenches with you when actually the time for grit comes. So these are certain tests. Of course, I wanted to know the why myself, obviously, because knowing the why is how you convince yourself that it is important for the user. So I wanted to know their perspective. But it also has a nice side benefit that it filters a lot of requests. Many people, they're busy and they don't want to do more than what they need to for something that is not very important to them. So how do you check that it's important to them? Just a little thing that I remembered from Amazon days.
Love that. And it is really interesting, just human nature. It's so much easier for me to think, oh, wow, this project is so important. It should be Curran's priority. But for me to think this is so important, it should be my priority, that's a higher bar. And it helps to differentiate what really is crucial.
Exactly. If you truly believe something will impact customers and your team's metrics, then you would put your back into it. And it is actually required. For something to be successful as well, you need to really be involved. You have to have complete involvement. You can't half bake it.
Yeah, 100%. And you've mentioned the concept of there not being any typical day in the life of a PM. What does it take to be a PM when it comes to organizing your time? And one concept that I find interesting here is this idea of manager versus maker time. Is that a framework that you find helpful as a PM?
That's a framework I find helpful when I need to make sure that our teams are not very distracted. So
This thing.
that someone else is a maker, because as a PM most of the time you're thinking about others because they are the inputs into your outcomes and you have to take care of those inputs. And when those inputs, you yourself as well are one input, when those inputs are human beings, it requires a much better understanding of what helps them do their best work. And manager and the maker schedule, it does resonate with me. I think it does make a lot of sense for you to consider designers, analysts, engineers as makers, right? you have to balance it with your need. Like, I like to involve people quite early, even in the discovery process. The calendar for customer interviews would be open for people to join in on mute and listen to the customer interview, right? Always. And so that there is an avenue if people do want to come, and notes would go out, and customer feedback would be piped into the engineering and the design team, etc., and everybody else. And I would request the design team to include me when they would have their discovery. The best design teams I worked with would do these conversations. Whether if your design team is actually not talking to the customer, is there's might be something something not right there, right? So I would request myself. So that's when you're thinking about others, right? And you're making sure that they're not overly distracted. So you have to keep all these things balanced. When it comes to the product role ourselves, I don't think I have I don't think a product manager can ever be one or the other, right? You cannot be a manager, only a manager or only a maker. It gets very hard. Just that's the nature of the role. Because what are you responsible for? You're responsible for the success of the product, which is everything. Everything. You can't go back. Product manager is probably the only person who can't say that this is not my job. So it might not be my job, but I have to go figure it out with the person whose job it is, right? I can't raise my hands and say, you can't do it. So what works well for me is time boxing, finding times when I would write a PRD, when I would review something, when I would go deep into thinking, research, when I would uh, nowadays it's become very simple, but I used to spend hours listening to customer service calls, reading CS feedback, trying to collate it, organize it. I was thrilled to 2 years ago when AI burst on the scene and when we could organize customer feedback. I was thrilled because I reclaimed a lot of time, right? Could still be close to customers without spending too much time there. But I think time boxing worked really well. I would usually write my PRDs at 8 in the morning before everybody came in the night, Friday afternoons when nobody wanted to really talk to other people, just finish their work and then sort of go out. So I think those are the times that I found different product managers, different companies, different stages of companies, different kind of products have to figure out their own formula. You have to be maker at some point and manager at some point. You can't just be a manager or a maker. At least that's been my experience, and that's been my experience with the PMs in my team, right, or analysts in my team. Right? And even some of the design leads in my team. Design leads have to do far more than design, right? You have to talk to customers, you have to work with product managers. Some of the best engineering and design leaders I've worked with, if you squint, the difference goes away. It's the product person starts looking like an engineering manager starts looking like the design lead starts looking like a PM. It's just, they do a lot of stuff because that's what it takes to succeed. So yeah, I know it's not a very clean answer, but I don't believe there is one for a product person.
I agree. I think a lot of it comes down to that ownership. Whether you are a product person or a marketer or anything in the company, if you're taking ownership of your area and your customer's experience, you cannot have the luxury of being only one or the other. You sort of have to do both.
Yeah,
The really interesting analogy to me,
that's a good way of putting this, actually. And
right?
if you truly own something, then you can't really box yourself into one bucket. You have to switch between them.
Yes. And you almost become, like in engineering speak, an API endpoint. You're making these connections between the engineering teams and the customer teams and all these other teams. It's a fascinating place to be. I wanted to go deeper into what you mentioned about AI. So you mentioned that AI has given you a whole lot of time back while still understanding the customer as well. What is your specific setup, or what have been your specific setups that have worked well for this?
I don't think any of them are very surprising now. There's so many threads on X. If you just go on different product managers and people who have shared, and I think it's quite similar. If you break down a product person's or a product team's work, right, there are every part of the life cycle has a chunk of work associated with it, right? And if that chunk of work, and if you can have a tool that helps you speed through that complex territory, I think that's where the advantage comes in. So I go and look for those chunks of work that I have to do, right? Uh, if I am, and there are some places where I have actively decided not to simplify things, right? For deliberate reasons, for very personal reasons, right? That doesn't slow me down per se, right? But it actually speeds me up because of understanding. But the places where I do is one of this is the one that I shared. So customer feedback. So something that I always audit when I join a new team or a new product is out of a few things that I do, right, to understand the health of the product and health of the team and everything, is what is our distance to customer, right? I like to call that like how much of customer feedback do we get and in what forms and when. So and across the entire life cycle of the product, customer feedback can mean different things. When you're just beginning, it can mean going out and doing the general market understanding and talking to people about the problems, etc. When you go further in, it could mean that you're running usability studies, etc. In the meantime, you're constantly talking to customers about their daily lives, their workflow, how they solve problems, what do they use to solve problems, what are their frustrations, what are they not, etc. All those kind of things. When you launch the product, you want to get feedback about the whole product, but also certain features. So then you think about contextual feedback, by feature, overall feedback. Then you have surveys you want to run to understand specific things. So that's why I said distance to customer can mean a lot of things in different ways. Right? You can have surveys, you have onboarding surveys to maybe profile them so that you can give them a best experience. You have cancellation service so that you can know why people canceled, so that you can go and influence your roadmap. Right? You have customer service calls, etc. So I would be present. I would try and first of all create these hooks in products so that the distance to customer of my team and me, everybody is as close to zero as possible. But then once you've created those hooks, the problem is that data will actually come in. Now what do you do? Right? So now you have to actually read it, listen to it, summarize it, organize it, interpret it. That part has completely collapsed. So once you have actually solicited and you've put in those hooks, which itself has become simpler, the whole thing about organizing and classification has collapsed. So that's a big when I'm trying to, as a product leader, no matter how big a team that I take care of, I usually keep one or two projects with myself just so that I'm connected to the product, the customer, as well as the problems team has to go through to actually build it so that we can find opportunities to speed it up. Otherwise, it's always secondhand information, right? So at least over recent times, I've had lesser and lesser time, right? But then try and keep at least one effort or initiative with me. But when I do that, it's research. There is a lot of work that goes in. Does a lot of research. They write PRDs. They create prototypes and mocks, and the research that goes into it. What are other people doing? What is the behavioral science behind it? Can we lean on certain studies and things that work? There could be so many things. That research has again collapsed, right, with deep research and everything else. But for each of these, there would be a human element that would give you the edge. If you can collapse that research, so can everybody else, right? Which means that you do have to put your creativity to see that, okay, now that I've gotten this, what else can I do to push it even more? That one final stretch that differentiates. And sometimes it's not needed, but many times it is, especially when you're making consequential products. So I think that whole process has become super simpler, right? The process to design has become super simpler, super simple as well. I built something for myself where I send myself reminders based on my emails and based on my conversations, right? So it goes into my conversations and tries to figure out if I should be reminded of something so that I don't drop the ball or, just to incorporate a bit of repetition in my life. So that's another way that I use AI, and I've encouraged the team to use AI. Of course, the coding aspect of it, I wouldn't waste any time talking about it, right? The coding assistants and the way things are going right now, that's becoming better and better. So these are the things that I would say, but I use it heavily for customer feedback and for research. Research for almost everything I do. I think edge cases is really interesting because that requires edge cases require creativity and a bit of experience in scar tissue, right? You can build a nice product with happy flows, but what if the data doesn't come in? How does the feature break? What happens if people don't understand this? What kind of error messages get thrown out? Empty scenarios when there is no data, things like that. There's some examples of edge cases. I think AI is becoming increasingly good at finding those. Also, I like to run pre-mortems with my teams and encourage them to run, because you eventually get to run faster later, because those are the problems you've predicted, so they don't show up, right? If they don't.
For anyone who's not familiar, what exactly is a pre-mortem?
So pre-mortem is, without taking too much time before you start building the product, you try and imagine the reasons why it would die. And then you try and see if there is any of those that you would want to build into your product right away. For some products, you don't have to go too deep into it. You just need to know the risks and go in with the eye open, because moving fast is important. For other products, the risk is too high. Like when I was in Coinbase and we were working on payment methods or KYC and AML flows and smoothing the experience there, there is a level of carefulness that is required, and you can't skip that. Right, the consequences can be bad later, so you don't want to do that. Especially with Coinbase, where we cared a lot about being in line with the regulations and playing right and doing right and still giving a great experience. That requires this whole set of different level of creativity there. But these are some of the things where it really matters, right? So pre-mortems, AI would identify all the different kinds of risks to your product, and then after you've generated that without spending too much time, then you can identify what are the must-haves which you can take care of now, which you would take care of only if the bridge comes later, and you can absorb that risk. But at least you're going with your eyes open.
Love that. That is a beautiful concept. And I also love that you don't have to write it. You can have AI write it for you, and then you get to digest it and think about it.
Yeah, like take the first step, and then put your human touch and see if this is missed anything based on your own experience,
Yeah.
and then you'll be complete.
And there's so much more. We could talk for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
That brings us to the conclusion of the interview. But before we end, I have a special segment at the end called the lightning round, where I'll throw out a couple of fast questions and just give you a quick response on where you would lean. The first question, this is a tricky one: data driven decisions or intuition based decisions?
Data informed decisions.
I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, use data to understand the current situation, see if you can find patterns, see if you can find desired paths, but use your layers of experience, which is what intuition is. Use your layers of experience to come up with new ways of achieving that. I think both together make for winning products. I haven't seen either of them uh, win if taken in isolation. So data informed, you don't say no data, but you also use intuition.
Short, focused meetings or longer collaborative sessions?
You stumped me with that. Well, no meetings are the best. No meetings are the best. If you have them very short and focused with a clear outcome and why we are here. However, I've also found that depending on what you're discussing, sometimes wandering helps. If you let minds wander, so you can't be a robot, right? You can't be a creative person and yet try and be a robot all your life. So you can't do that. A little bit wandering helps, but keep it focused. That are we wearing away or not? The collaborative sessions are required. They are not they're an and not an or. I think brainstorming really works. Talking about a problem together, right? Bringing people in, especially people involved, and talking about and hashing things out and getting on the same page. I think those are important tools still. I don't think I would ever skip that. So both, but do it right.
Specialized product teams or generalists?
In areas where you can't afford to make many mistakes, more specialized the better. In areas where you can again wander a bit, have generalists. However, there is a weird exception where some generalists are so good at becoming experts very soon that make sure that you keep an eye out for them, right? There's some generalists, the best engineers, best designers, best PMs, best analysts will grok things very very quickly, and they understand what's important really really fast, like great founders. And then they can probably solve the problem in ways that a specialist might not be able to. So I think you need to have both around. But when you have something which is really really specialized and you're really deep, you are an API product for machine learning, it'll be good if you have an ML expert, right? So I think these are all, there is, again, no either or. It's all very contextual. Unfortunately, all answers in product is nuanced. It depends on the context.
Very true. And the final question: working with legacy systems or building from scratch?
Well, if a legacy system exists, right, and you have a big base on it, and you can move fast on it, then there's no problem with legacy systems, right? That's fine. You can't always be in a situation where you're building zero to one. Because what happens once you built it, then that product exists. Now what do you do? And you can't, right? So now you have to improve it and I have to grow it, right? So I think if you can move fast on a legacy system and iterate and then grow, then do that. If not, then look to that's a candidate for re-architecture, redesign, rebuilding. Right? I would really advise not to work on COBOL mainframes now, right? That please upgrade and migrate away, right? But then if a product exists and you can iterate on it, that's great. Like Amazon's retail website, it's legacy, it's old, right? However, the team is able to move fast on it as well, right? As fast as they need to. So can't be re-architecting every 3 years, right? You shouldn't be. So maybe the judgment is, can you actually move fast on it?
Which comes back to what you were saying earlier. What matters is the outcomes. So which is going to be best for your outcome? Well, that brings us to the conclusion of the interview. Where can people go to learn more about you?
I'm active on Twitter. I am on LinkedIn as well. My DMs on Twitter are open. So I think these are the places people can actively reach out. I always try and respond back to everyone. There are product teams and founders I work with who I advise on certain product challenges that they might have. It could save them, because it saves them months of runway just to get the right 2 degree, 2 degree guidance and correction sometimes, or even more. So I do that. They reach out. I try and respond as much as I can, and almost always to everyone. It might not be within a day, but I will get back to you. So you can always reach out. So that's not a problem. And my email ID is karanperi@gmail.com. My first and last name. So that's good as well.
Fantastic. Well, all of that will be in the show notes, except probably not the email. Everything else will be in the show notes and in the description below. Thank you for coming on the show. This has been such a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Nate. Had a blast.